Once he was alone, Hugh's excitement gradually dropped away from him, and he realized that he was fagged out and very sleepy. He stretched out on a built-in couch and fell asleep. When he awoke, he discovered that the only door to the compartment was barred from the other side. Worse than that, his knife was gone. He had waited an indefinitely long time when he heard activity at the door. It opened. 2 husky, unsmiling men entered.
"Come along,"
said one of them. He sized them up, noting that neither of them carried a knife. No chance to snatch one from their belts, then. On the other hand, he might be able to break away from them. But beyond them, a wary distance away in the outer room, were 2 other equally formidable men, each armed with a knife. One balanced his for throwing, the other held his by the grip, ready to stab at close quarters. He was boxed in, and he knew it. They had anticipated his possible moves. He had long since learned to relax before the inevitable. He composed his face and marched quietly out. Once through the door, he saw Ertz, waiting and quite evidently in charge of the party of men. He spoke to him, being careful to keep his voice calm. "Hello, Bill. Pretty extensive preparations you've made. Some trouble, maybe?" Ertz seemed momentarily uncertain of his answer, then said,
"You're going before the captain."
"Good," Hugh answered. "Thanks, Bill. But do you think it's wise to try to sell the idea to him without laying a little preliminary foundation with the others?" Ertz was annoyed at his apparent thick-headedness, and showed it.
"You don't get the idea," he growled. "You're going before the captain to stand trial for heresy."
Hugh considered this as if the idea had not before occurred to him. He answered mildly, "You're off down the wrong passage, Bill. Perhaps a charge and trial is the best way to get at the matter, but I'm not a peasant, simply to be hustled before the captain. I must be tried by the council. I am a scientist."
"Are you now?" Ertz said softly. "I've had advice about that. You were written off the lists. Just what you are is a matter for the captain to determine."
Hugh held his peace. It was against him, he could see, and there was no point in antagonizing Ertz. Ertz made a signal. The 2 unarmed men each grasped one of Hugh's arms. He went with them quietly. Hugh looked at the captain with new interest. The old man had not changed much. A little fatter, perhaps. The captain settled himself slowly down in his chair and picked up the memorandum before him.
"What's this all about?" he began irritably. "I don't understand it."
Mort Tyler was there to present the case against Hugh, a circumstance which Hugh had no way of anticipating and which added to his misgivings. He searched his boyhood recollections for some handle by which to reach the man's sympathy, found none. Tyler cleared his throat and commenced. "This is the case of one Hugh Hoyland, Captain, formerly one of your junior scientists."
"Scientist, eh? Why doesn't the council deal with him?"
"Because he is no longer a scientist, Captain. He went over to the Muties. He now returns among us, preaching heresy and seeking to undermine your authority." The captain looked at Hugh with the ready belligerency of a man jealous of his prerogatives.
"Is that so?" he bellowed. "What have you to say for yourself?"
"It's not true, Captain," Hugh answered. "All that I have said to anyone has been an affirmation of the absolute truth of our ancient knowledge. I have not disputed the truths under which we live. I have simply affirmed them more forcibly than is the ordinary custom. I
still don't understand this,"
the captain interrupted, shaking his head.
"You're charged with heresy, yet you say you believe the teachings. If you aren't guilty, why are you here?"
"Perhaps I can clear the matter up," put in Ertz.
"Hoyland—" "Well, I hope you can," the captain went on. "Come, let's hear it."
Ertz proceeded to give a reasonably correct, but slanted, version of Hoyland's return and his strange story. The captain listened, with an expression that varied between puzzlement and annoyance. When Ertz had concluded, the captain turned to Hugh. "Humph," he said. Hugh spoke immediately. "The gist of my contention, Captain, is that there is a place up at no weight where you can actually see the truth of our faith, that the ship is moving, where you can actually see Jordan's plan in operation. That is not a denial of faith, that affirms it. There is no need to take my word for it. Jordan himself will prove it." Seeing that the captain appeared to be in a state of indecision, Tyler broke in. "Captain, there is a possible explanation of this incredible situation which I feel duty-bound that you should hear. Offhand, there are two obvious interpretations of Hoyland's ridiculous story. He may simply be guilty of extreme heresy, or he may be a mutie at heart and engaged in a scheme to lure you into their hands. But there is a third, more charitable explanation, and one which I feel within me is probably the true one. There is record that Hoyland was seriously considered for the Convertor at his birth inspection, but that his deviation from normal was slight, being simply an overlarge head, and he was passed. It seems to me that the terrible experiences he has undergone at the hands of the muties have finally unhinged an unstable mind. The poor chap is simply not responsible for his own actions." Hugh looked at Tyler with new respect. To absolve him of guilt, and at the same time to make absolutely certain that Hugh would wind up making the trip. How neat. The captain shook a palm at them. "This has gone on long enough." Then, turning to Ertz, "Is there recommendation?" "Yes, Captain. The Convertor." "Very well, then. I really don't see, Ertz," he continued testily, "why I should be bothered with these details. It seems to me that you should be able to handle discipline in your department without my help." "Yes, Captain." The captain shoved back from his desk, started to get up. "Recommendation confirmed. Dismissed." Anger flooded through Hugh at the unreasonable injustice of it. They had not even considered looking at the only real evidence he had in his defense. He heard a shout, "Wait!" then discovered it was his own voice. The captain paused, looking at him. "Wait a moment," Hugh went on, his words spilling out of their own accord. "This won't make any difference, for you're all so damn sure you know all the answers that you won't consider a fair offer to come see with your own eyes. Nevertheless, it still moves." Hugh had plenty of time to think, lying in the compartment where they confined him to await the power needs of the Convertor. Time to think, and to second-guess his mistakes. Telling his tale to Ertz immediately, that had been mistake number one. He should have waited, become reacquainted with the man and felt him out, instead of depending on a friendship which had never been very close. Second mistake, Mort Tyler. When he heard his name, he should have investigated and found out just how much influence the man had with Ertz. He had known him of old. He should have known better. Well, here he was, condemned as a mutant, or maybe as a heretic. It came to the same thing. He considered whether or not he should have tried to explain why mutants happened. He had learned about it himself in some of the old records in Joe Jim's possession. No, it wouldn't wash. How could you explain about radiations from the outside causing the birth of mutants when the listeners did not believe there was such a place as outside? No, he had messed it up before he was ever taken before the captain. His self-recriminations were disturbed at last by the sound of his door being unfastened. It was too soon for another of the infrequent meals. He thought that they had come at last to take him away, and renewed his resolve to take someone with him. But he was mistaken. He heard a voice of gentle dignity. Son, how does this happen?" It was Lieutenant Nelson, his first teacher, looking older than ever, and frail. The interview was distressing for both of them. The old man, childless himself, had cherished great hopes for his protégé, even the ambition that he might eventually aspire to the captaincy, though he had kept his vicarious ambition to himself, believing it not good for the young to praise them too highly. It had hurt his heart when the youth was lost. Now he had returned, a man, but under disgraceful conditions and under sentence of death. The meeting was no less unhappy for Hugh. He had loved the old man, in his way, wanted to please him, and needed his approval. But he could see, as he told his story, that Nelson was not capable of treating the story as anything but an aberration of Hugh's mind, and he suspected that Nelson would rather see him meet a quick death in the Convertor, his atoms smashed to hydrogen, and giving up clean, useful power, than have him live to make a mock of the ancient teachings. In that, he did the old man an injustice. He underrated Nelson's mercy, but not his devotion to science. But let it be said for Hugh that, had there been no more at issue than his own personal welfare, he might have preferred death to breaking the heart of his benefactor, being a romantic and more than a bit foolish. Presently, the old man got up to leave, the visit having grown unendurable to each of them.
"Is there anything I can do for you, son? Do they feed you well enough?"
"Quite well, thanks," Hugh lied.
"Is there anything else?"
"No. Yes, you might send me some tobacco. I haven't had a chew in a long time."
"I'll take care of it. Is there anyone you would like to see?"
"Why, I was under the impression that I was not permitted visitors, ordinary visitors."
"You are right, but I think perhaps I may be able to get the rule relaxed. But you will have to give me your promise not to speak of your heresy," he added anxiously.
Hugh thought quickly. This was a new aspect, a new possibility. His uncle? No. While they had always got along well, their minds did not meet. They would greet each other as strangers. He had never made friends easily. Ertz had been his obvious next friend, and now look at the damned thing. Then he recalled his village chum, Alan Mahoney, with whom he had played as a boy. True, he had seen practically nothing of him since the time he was apprenticed to Nelson. Still, does Alan Mahoney still live in our village?
Why, yes.
I'd like to see him, if he'll come. Alan arrived, nervous, ill at ease, but plainly glad to see Hugh, and very much upset to find him under sentence to make the trip. Hugh pounded him on the back.
"Good boy," he said.
"I knew you would come."
"Of course I would,"
protested Alan.
"Once I knew. But nobody in the village knew it. I don't think even the witnesses knew it."
"Well, you're here. That's what matters. Tell me about yourself. Have you married?"
No. Let's not waste time talking about me. Nothing ever happens to me anyhow. How in Jordan's name did you get in this jam, Hugh?"
"I can't talk about that, Alan. I promised Lieutenant Nelson that I wouldn't."
"Well, what's a promise? That kind of a promise. You're in a jam, fellow. Don't I know it? Somebody have it in for you?"
"Well, our old pal Mort Tyler didn't help any. I think I can say that much." Alan whistled and nodded his head slowly.
"That explains a lot."
"How come? You know something?"
Maybe not. After you went away, he married Edris Baxter."
"So. Yes, that clears up a lot." He remained silent for a time. Presently, Alan spoke up.
"Look, Hugh, you're not going to sit here and take it, are you? Particularly with Tyler mixed in it. We gotta get you out of here."
"How?"
"I don't know. Pull a raid, maybe? I guess I could get a few knives to rally round and help us. All good boys, spoiling for a fight."
"Then, when it's over, we'd all be for the Convertor. You, me, and your pals. No, it won't wash."
"But we've got to do something. We can't just sit here and wait for them to burn you."
"I know that." Hugh studied Alan's face. Was it a fair thing to ask? He went on, reassured by what he had seen. "Listen, you would do anything you could to get me out of this, wouldn't you?"
"You know that."
Alan's tone showed hurt. "Very well, then. There is a dwarf named Bobo. I'll tell you how to find him." Alan climbed, up and up, higher than he had ever been since Hugh had led him, as a boy, into foolhardy peril. He was older now, more conservative. He had no stomach for it. To the very real danger of leaving the well-traveled lower levels was added his superstitious ignorance. But still, he climbed. This should be about the place, unless he had lost count. But he saw nothing of the dwarf. Bobo saw him first. A slingshot load caught Alan in the pit of the stomach, even as he was shouting, "Bobo!" Bobo backed into Joe Jim's compartment and dumped his load at the feet of the twins. "Fresh meat," he said proudly. "So it is," agreed Jim indifferently. "Well, it's yours. Take it away." The dwarf dug a thumb into a twisted ear. "Funny," he said. "He knows Bobo's name." Joe looked up from the book he was reading, Browning's Collected Poems, L Press, New York, London, Luna City, CR 3/5. "That's interesting. Hold on a moment." Hugh had prepared Alan for the shock of Joe Jim's appearance. In reasonably short order, he collected his wits sufficiently to be able to tell his tale. Joe Jim listened to it without much comment, Bobo with interest, but little comprehension. When Alan concluded, Jim remarked, "Well, you win, Joe. He didn't make it." Then, turning to Alan, he added, "You can take Hoyland's place. Can you play checkers?" Alan looked from one head to the other. "But you don't understand," he said. "Aren't you going to do anything about it?" Joe looked puzzled. "Us? Why should we?" "But you've got to. Don't you see? He's depending on you. There's nobody else he can look to. That's why I came. Don't you see?" "Wait a moment," drawled Jim. "Wait a moment. Keep your belt on. Supposing we did want to help him, which we don't. How in Jordan's ship could we? Answer me that." Why... Alan stumbled in the face of such stupidity. "Why, get up a rescue party, of course, and go down and get him out." "Why should we get ourselves killed in a fight to rescue your friend?" Bobo pricked his ears. "Fight?" he inquired eagerly. "No, Bobo," Joe denied. "No fight, just talk." "Oh," said Bobo, and returned to passivity. Alan looked at the dwarf. "If you'd even let Bobo and me—" "No," Joe said shortly. "It's out of the question. Shut up about it." Alan sat in a corner, hugging his knees in despair. If only he could get out of there. He could still try to stir up some help down below. The dwarf seemed to be asleep, though it was difficult to be sure with him. If only Joe Jim would sleep, too. Joe Jim showed no indication of sleepiness. Joe tried to continue reading, but Jim interrupted him from time to time. Alan could not hear what they were saying. Presently, Joe raised his voice. "Is that your idea of fun?" he demanded. "Well," said Jim, "it beats checkers." "It does it? Suppose you get a knife in your eye. Where would I be then?" "You're getting old, Joe. No juice in you anymore." "You're as old as I am." "Yeah, but I got young ideas." "Oh, you make me sick. Have it your own way, but don't blame me. Bobo!" The dwarf sprang up at once, alert. "Yeah, boss?" "Go out and dig up Squatty and Long Arm and Pig." Joe Jim got up, went to a locker, and started pulling knives out of their racks. Hugh heard the commotion in the passageway outside his prison. It could be the guards coming to take him to the Convertor, though they probably wouldn't be so noisy. Or it could be just some excitement unrelated to him. On the other hand, it might be. It was. The door burst open, and Alan was inside, shouting at him and thrusting a brace of knives into his hands. He was hurried out of the door, while stuffing the knives in his belt and accepting 2 more. Outside, he saw Joe Jim, who did not see him at once, as he was methodically letting fly, as calmly as if he had been engaging in target practice in his own study. And Bobo, who ducked his head and grinned with a mouth widened by a bleeding cut, but continued the easy flow of the motion whereby he loaded and let fly. There were 3 others, 2 of whom Hugh recognized as belonging to Joe Jim's privately owned gang of bullies, muties by definition and birthplace. They were not deformed. The count does not include still forms on the floor plates.
"Come on!" yelled Alan. "There will be more in no time."
He hurried down the passage to the right. Joe Jim desisted and followed him. Hugh let one blade go for luck at a figure running away to the left. The target was poor, and he had no time to see if he had drawn blood. They scrambled along the passage, Bobo bringing up the rear, as if reluctant to leave the fun, and came to a point where a side passage crossed the main one. Alan led them to the right again.
"Stairs ahead,"
he shouted. They did not reach them. An airtight door, rarely used, clanged in their faces 10 yards short of the stairs. Joe Jim's bravos checked their flight, and they looked doubtfully at their master. Bobo broke his thickened nails trying to get a purchase on the door. The sounds of pursuit were clear behind them.
"Boxed in," said Joe softly. "I hope you like it, Jim."
Hugh saw a head appear around the corner of the passage they had quitted. He threw overhand, but the distance was too great. The knife clanged harmlessly against steel. The head disappeared. Longarm kept his eye on the spot, his sling loaded and ready. Hugh grabbed Bobo's shoulder.
"Listen, do you see that light?"
The dwarf blinked stupidly. Hugh pointed to the intersection of the glow tubes where they crossed in the overhead directly above the junction of the passages.
"That light. Can you hit them where they cross?"
Bobo measured the distance with his eye. It would be a hard shot under any conditions at that range. Here, constricted as he was by the low passageway, it called for a fast, flat trajectory and allowance for higher weight than he was used to. He did not answer. Hugh felt the wind of his swing, but did not see the shot. There was a tinkling crash. The passage became dark.
"Now!"
yelled Hugh, and led them away at a run. As they neared the intersection, he shouted,
"Hold your breaths! Mind the gas!"
The radioactive vapor poured lazily out from the broken tube above and filled the crossing with a greenish mist. Hugh ran to the right, thankful for his knowledge as an engineer of the lighting circuits. He had picked the right direction. The passage ahead was black, being serviced from beyond the break. He could hear footsteps around him. Whether they were friend or enemy, he did not know. They burst into light. No one was in sight but a scared and harmless peasant who scurried away at an unlikely pace. They took a quick muster. All were present, but Bobo was making heavy going of it. Joe looked at him.
"He sniffed the gas, I think. Pound his back."
Pig did so with a will. Bobo belched deeply, was suddenly sick, then grinned.
"He'll do,"
decided Joe. The slight delay had enabled one, at least, to catch up with them. He came plunging out of the dark, unaware of, or careless of, the strength against him. Alan knocked Pig's arm down as he raised it to throw.
"Let me at him," he demanded. "He's mine."
It was Tyler.
"Man fight?"
Alan challenged, thumb on his blade. Tyler's eyes darted from adversary to adversary and accepted the invitation to individual duel by lunging at Alan. The quarters were too cramped for throwing. They closed, each achieving his grab in parry, fist to wrist. Alan was stockier, probably stronger. Tyler was slippery. He attempted to give Alan a knee to the crotch. Alan evaded it, stamped on Tyler's planted foot. They went down. There was a crunching crack. A moment later, Alan was wiping his knife against his thigh.
"Let's get going," he complained. "I'm scared."
They reached a stairway and raced up it, Longarm and Pig ahead to fan out on each level and cover their flanks, and the third of the 3 choppers, Hugh heard him called Squatty, covering the rear. The others bunched in between. Hugh thought they had won free when he heard shouts and the clatter of a thrown knife just above him. He reached the level above in time to be cut not deeply but jaggedly by a ricocheted blade. 3 men were down. Longarm had a blade sticking in the fleshy part of his upper arm, but it did not seem to bother him. His slingshot was still spinning. Pig was scrambling after a thrown knife, his own armament exhausted. But there were signs of his work. 1 man was down on one knee some 20 feet away. He was bleeding from a knife wound in the thigh. As the figure steadied himself with one hand against the bulkhead and reached toward an empty belt with the other, Hugh recognized him. Bill Ertz. He had led a party up another way and flanked them, to his own ruin. Bobo crowded behind Hugh and got his mighty arm free for the cast. Hugh caught at it. "Easy, Bobo," he directed. "In the stomach and easy." The dwarf looked puzzled, but did as he was told. Ertz folded over at the middle and slid to the deck. "Well placed," said Jim. "Bring him along, Bobo," directed Hugh, "and stay in the middle." He ran his eye over their party, now huddled at the top of that flight of stairs. "All right, gang, up we go again. Watch it." Longarm and Pig swarmed up the next flight, the others disposing themselves as usual. Joe looked annoyed. In some fashion, a fashion by no means clear at the moment, he had been eased out as leader of this gang, his gang, and Hugh was giving orders. He reflected that there was no time now to make a fuss. It might get them all killed. Jim did not appear to mind. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying himself. They put 10 more levels behind them with no organized opposition. Hugh directed them not to kill peasants unnecessarily. The 3 bravos obeyed. Bobo was too loaded down with Ertz to constitute a problem in discipline. Hugh saw to it they put 30-odd more decks below them and were well into no man's land before he let vigilance relax at all. Then he called a halt, and they examined wounds. The only deep ones were to Longarm's arm and Bobo's face. Joe Jim examined them and applied presses with which he had outfitted himself before starting. Hugh refused treatment for his flesh wound. "It's stopped bleeding," he insisted, "and I've got a lot to do." "You've got nothing to do but to get up home," said Joe, "and that will be an end to this foolishness." "Not quite," denied Hugh. "You may be going home, but Alan and I and Bobo are going up to No Wait, to the captain's veranda." "Nonsense," said Joe. "What for?" "Come along if you like and see." "All right, gang, let's go." Joe started to speak, stopped when Jim kept still. Joe Jim followed along. They floated gently through the door of the veranda. Hugh, Alan, Bobo with his still passive Burton, and Joe Jim. "That's it," said Hugh to Alan, waving his hand at the splendid stars. "That's what I've been telling you about." Alan looked and clutched at Hugh's arm. "Jordan," he moaned. "We'll fall out." He closed his eyes tightly. Hugh shook him. "It's all right," he said. "It's grand. Open your eyes." Joe Jim touched Hugh's arm. "What's it all about?" he demanded. "Why did you bring him up here?" He pointed to Ertz. "Oh, him. Well, when he wakes up, I'm going to show him the stars. Prove to him that the ship moves." "Well, what for?" "Then I'll send him back down to convince some others." Suppose he doesn't have any better luck than you had." "Why, then—" Hugh shrugged his shoulders. "Why, then we'll just have to do it all over, I suppose, till we do convince them. We've got to do it, you know."